The Chicago Bears are holding off on signing any veteran free agent defensive ends for now. Ryan Poles wants to see how his group looks once the pads come on, and he knows there's not a huge rush to get something done right away.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On the show today, we hear from Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus to kick off training camp. A lot of focus on, of course, Caleb Williams and company trying to get off to a fast start. But today I want to focus more on the roster as it enters camp. Some sort of discussion about signing a veteran free agent defensive lineman. Ryan Poles brought it up unprompted to start off the press conference, answered a few questions, and gave us a sense of where the team stands right now, which is holding firm, but not necessarily locked into that or not ruling out bringing in someone. But we got an update on kind of what Ryan Poles' approach is going to be and what kind of contact, I guess, let's say, conversations, contact, connection they've had with Yannick Ngakoue as a free agent. And then on the tail end here, we'll wrap up looking at a couple of the injury designations to start Bears training camp with a couple players not participating in practices early on here. But I want to start with how Ryan Poles views this defensive line, because it was interesting that in his opening of the press conference, he was kind of going through the main things he wanted to hit and talk about, the summer and players coming in and feeling good about this stuff. And then he goes on to say something along the lines of, and as far as a lot of people have brought up the defensive line questions or defensive end position, and he goes on to say, we like where our guys are right now in that regard, and we're comfortable with the players we have on the roster, but of course we always keep an eye on any opportunity to make our roster better. But he kind of brought that up first, and I think anticipating that it would be something he would get asked about. But there was some good follow-up here on how he is approaching that decision, both monitoring his own players and also then keeping tabs on what options might be available for him and, as far as outside players to fill that 90th roster spot that still sits open on this Bears roster.
You brought up the defensive end issue without us having to do it. What do you need for a fit there? Are you waiting for prices to come down? Are there people on the market that intrigue you, or do you want to see whether some of them shake free closer to cut?
Yeah, I don't really see it as a defensive end problem. It's our mindset is always how can we make a position group the best we can possibly make it and deep as we possibly can make it. So it's like I said, just really leaning on Travis and Eric to continue to develop the players that we have in and see, especially when we get pads on, see how they do. We saw some really encouraging things during OTAs, but we all know this game is played in full pads, so we want to see that process through.
I think this was Ryan Poles' way of saying, listen, we like the defensive line talent that we have. We're really excited about a lot of the young players on this roster. And I think he's legitimate when he feels like, yes, they were impressive for us at OTAs and minicamp. Like they felt like things were tracking in the right direction for them. But he's realistic enough to know that what these guys were able to show during OTAs and minicamp with no pads and not really full kind of contact is limited, right? It doesn't tell you the full picture of what they're going to be able to do in actual football games. And so I think Poles is approaching this from the stance of, let's see how they look with the pads on. We think that we think they're making the right kind of progress, that once the pads come on, we will be impressed enough to be fairly comfortable with where they're at. But we do want to see how they actually perform with the pads on, and maybe with a few days of padding practices or however many days that ends up being, for them to make a confident evaluation in where this defensive line stands, then they can kind of move forward with either, okay, let's bring in that veteran free agent to kind of lift this group up and put them a little more over the top, or maybe they really show enough in those padded practices at training camp to say, yep, Austin Booker's looking like everything we wanted him to be as a 5th-round pick. DeMarcus Walker is looking strong as a starting defensive end opposite Montez Sweat. And that, like none of these guys had Sweat in training camp last year, so we haven't gotten to see a lot of them get the Montez Sweat boost, the Montez Sweat bump up, which we'll hear Poles talk about a little bit more in a moment. But maybe there's enough here where they actually can be more confident than we are, I think, in this defensive line based on what they're able to do in pads. I still find that a little bit unlikely. I still think, despite what Ryan Poles said there and some of the other things we'll hear from him, I still think it's more likely than not that they do end up signing a veteran defensive lineman at some point, mainly because they continue to leave one open roster spot. And that's the big smoking gun here. It's that the veterans reported to training camp on Friday, and so far, they have not filled that 90th roster spot. In theory, you could sign, the Bears worked out some linebacker yesterday, had a free agent linebacker come in and do a workout. He's a special teams guy. I can't even remember his name, to be honest with you. In theory, Ryan Poles could sign any old player he wants, Joe Schmo off the street or this linebacker or whoever, fill the 90th spot. And then, if you decide a week from now you want to sign a defensive end, you cut somebody and you fill that other spot with the defensive end, right? That to me is the surprising approach here, or the thing that gives me confidence that I think they're still going to make a move. They have been intentionally keeping this spot free and still are at the start of training camp. For some, there has to be a reason. It's possible that reason is not veteran free agent defensive end, but that's got to be, if I was setting the FanDuel betting odds for it, for what that 90th roster spot becomes, or why they've held that 90th roster spot open, that to me would make the most sense. That'd be the best odds of what's likely to go there. It's hard to imagine there was any other reason to have left this open for so long, so it's ready to go so you can fill that spot. And, I guess maybe if you evaluate this defensive line after a week or two and say, yep, they're great, then you can fill it with Joe Schmo. But I still feel like it might be smarter to just fill it with anybody, because you can just cut the same person you just signed if you decide later on you want to bring in a free agent. So I'll be curious to see if and how Ryan Poles fills that spot before making it a veteran defensive end, because it doesn't have to be right away, but I still think that's probably the most likely plan for this team. And if you had to put betting odds on which player it's most likely to be, again, I think the favorite has to be Yannick Ngakoue. And Ryan Poles revealed that the Bears have still had some good contact with him throughout the process of Ngakoue recovering from his injury. So we'll get the latest from Ryan Poles on where that stands. And I think Poles gave kind of a conflicting answer that I'm having a little bit of trouble parsing out what exactly he meant, or where exactly the actual truth is here. So we'll kind of go through the back and forth that Poles gave and some of the confusion that I think still persists around Yannick Ngakoue next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience are the winning formula for championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. We're talking about superchargers and exhaust kits, LED headlights, roof racks, and more. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality candidates that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because they have all the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. I am on LinkedIn. I bet you might be on LinkedIn, and if you're not, a lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are all a part of the LinkedIn community. And that's why LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who might not be actively searching for a new job, but could be open to the perfect role. Like in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job boards. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The Bears aren't ready or eager to sign a free agent defensive end just yet, based on how we heard Ryan Poles talk about the position and the way that there's, still happy in evaluating how they're going to go and still want to see them with the pads on, but generally trending in the direction that they want. But that doesn't mean they're not still doing their homework on all of the veteran free agent defensive end options. And of course, they're always prepared with all the free agent options available at every position, but particularly defensive end seems to be the spot of focus, and that's the biggest weakness on the roster right now, or the defensive line as a whole, and that's why we're talking about it here. But especially a player that was on the roster last season and injured as a part of being on this roster last season, the Bears have been in continued contact with Yannick Ngakoue. The exact extent of that contact was made unclear by Ryan Poles from the beginning of his sentence to the end. I mean, I guess they're different sentences, but from the beginning of his answer to the end of his answer. He starts off by giving us something that's like, oh, okay, the Bears are maybe intimately and actively involved with this. And then on the follow-up question, it's like, oh, well, we maybe not as much as we thought, but then he kind of not completely contradicted what he said earlier, but it was just a little bit vague, a little bit more, unclear where exactly this relationship and this situation lines up. But we all kind of remember, Ngakoue finishing last season injured, and that being one of the factors throughout the course of this offseason was not only does he want to skip OTAs and minicamp and just show up at training camp, but also is he going to be healthy and ready to go? And I do think Ryan Poles feigned what's the word here? Ignorance, not ignorance, but I think he pretended to not know the answer to one of the questions of this as well. He didn't answer it. He didn't say no, but he didn't not say. He kind of made it seem like he didn't know, but he didn't actually say no clearly. So here's how Ryan Poles responded when he was asked about Yannick Ngakoue in particular. And pay attention to the first thing he says about Ngakoue's injury recovery process. And then pay attention to how he answers at the very end when asked a follow-up question about Ngakoue's health. Because the beginning of his answer here and the last things he say here seem to be in conflict a little bit for me.
Ryan, just a follow-up on the pass rush. Mm-hmm. What was your evaluation of Yannick Ngakoue last season for you guys?
Yep.
And how in the loop or involved have you guys been in his recovery from the injury?
Yeah, so I'll work backwards. So with the physical therapy, our athletic training group has been a part of that all the way through. Evaluation-wise, I think once we got Montez, you saw the sack rate go up for really everybody. So I think it enhanced everyone, but really enjoyed our time with him. Thought he did a nice job, brought some leadership, so it was positive.
Is he healthy now?
Our guys haven't put their hands on him. He's been doing physical therapy in a different place. So I can't really answer that.
So on the front end, Ryan Poles there says, our athletic training group has been a part of the physical therapy process all the way through. It was not his exact quote, but it's kind of how he started saying, our trainers and stuff, we've been part of this process throughout, something along those lines. And then the follow-up question, is he healthy? Well, he's doing physical therapy somewhere else, and we haven't really had our hands on him. Well, have the Bears been a part of the process throughout, or has he been doing physical therapy elsewhere? And notice that in that second answer, where he says, well, physical therapy has been in a different place, we don't have our hands on him. The question was, is Yannick Ngakoue healthy now? And Ryan Poles says, essentially, we don't know. That's not him saying, yes, he's healthy, or no, he's not healthy. It's him saying, I don't know. And I think that part may be feigning some amount of, pleading the fifth is probably the better way to describe it there, where I would think that Ryan Poles has been having some regular contact with Yannick Ngakoue and his agent. And I would think every time they check in on that process throughout the offseason, like, Ryan Poles would get an update on Yannick Ngakoue's health. And like, I think it is true that Ryan Poles does not know with 100% certainty that Yannick Ngakoue is 100% ready to go until he's in the building and passes the physical or whatever. Like that, he's not lying when he says, well, we don't know until he would be here and clear our check-in. But I do think Ryan Poles knows very well where Yannick Ngakoue is in his recovery. I think Ryan Poles knows whether or not Ngakoue is close or really 100% or still has a lot of rehab to do. Ryan Poles knows that and didn't answer the question intentionally and copped out by saying, well, we don't know if he's healthy until he actually comes here and in the building. And that's not lying. And it's not, I get it. There's, competitive advantages here or whatnot, but like, I just thought it was a really interesting kind of approach there. And I'm still left a little bit more confused than I was like at the beginning of the answer. It's like, Ngakoue's been around. They've been in touch with Ngakoue and they're definitely keeping close tabs on this. And then again, it's like, well, but we haven't actually been hands-on with them. And it's like, well, how involved have you been then? The other thing about his answer there in the middle of that was when he was asked about, evaluating Ngakoue, and when he used the phrase, we enjoyed our time with him, that does kind of make it sound like their time with him is done. You know what I mean? Like, there's different ways you could have phrased that. Like, we liked having him around, or we were grateful for what he was able to give us last season. But when you say we enjoyed our time with him, it doesn't mean you can't then have more time with him. But the phrasing there is interesting. And I'm trying not to read too much into that, and I'm not here to declare that means there's no way Ngakoue comes back. But that was an interesting phrasing there that caught my eye. Of like, we enjoyed our time with him. That's usually what you say, like, afterward when you're done. But the question was, hey, can you evaluate last year? So I mean, it was a past tense question. They asked him to, hey, look back in the past and tell us about this. So he answered in past tense. It's not as though he was completely burying the possibility there. But just a couple of interesting things about how Ryan Poles approached the Ngakoue question. I still think it's very much on the table. I think Ryan Poles is intimately aware of where Ngakoue is in his process and what his cost might be and all these things. And I think he's trying to play it cool, not tip his hand, not create any leverage for Ngakoue, and not, make any of the players on his roster concerned if he's openly flirting with a specific veteran free agent to come and push other people down on the depth chart. Could be very well that the Bears prefer another free agent defensive end option instead, like Emmanuel Ogbah or one of the other guys that might be available. It's not all Ngakoue, but certainly Ngakoue is the guy that they're most familiar with, who was already here, and who I would say is most likely to be the free agent defensive end they would sign if they do indeed end up signing one. So that's kind of where the roster turnover conversation and the biggest weakness on this team defensive end stands right now. We also got a couple of injury updates, though, to start training camp, as players reported. A couple of guys on the non-football injury list, one temporarily on the physically unable to perform list. We'll kind of check in on what's going on with the various injury lists as the Bears players are all reporting to training camp next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best and happiest self. I do online therapy every single week, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and that's why I so strongly recommend getting therapy through a place like BetterHelp, because so often we can find ourselves, comparing our lives to other people, and social media certainly only shows us what they want to show us, only the positive parts, and therapy can help you focus more on what you actually want instead of what other people have, so you can start living your best life. If you've been thinking about trying therapy, check out BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. The Bears are relatively healthy entering training camp, and yet I think they're less healthy than we thought they were entering training camp. I mean, I think Karan Amagaji was the only question mark, the only true known injury coming into Bears training camp. It was, is he going to be ready for training camp as expected or not? And the answer is not. And I want to dive into that a little bit more and kind of look at what both Matt Eberflus and Ryan Polis have said about that throughout this process. The other main injury update that we got was that new tight end Gerald Everett also starting training camp on the non-football injury list. And to be clear, the non-football injury list is different than the physically unable to perform list, the PUP list. This is the NFI list. It's the same list that Karan Amagaji is on, but for different reasons. So the NFI list, non-football injury list, it can be a variety of things, but the most important thing to remember is that it has to be something that happened away from the Chicago Bears football team. So if it was an injury you suffered at practice, then you'd go on the PUP list. Or if it was an injury you suffered last season with the team and you're still recovering from that injury, like if the injury happened in the context of your job duties as a signed player of the Chicago Bears, then you would go on the physically unable to perform list. The non-football injury list has to be an injury or I guess illness or something that happened somewhere else. So Karan Amagaji is on the NFI list because his injury happened in college. And because it's still recovering from that college season, it was a football injury, but it was a non-football injury because it was away from the NFL football and away from Chicago Bears football. Gerald Everett, we do not know yet what the extent of his situation is. Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus talked in the late morning. Gerald Everett ended up on the NFI list in the afternoon. Players were still checking in as Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus were talking, so we didn't get a specific update on what he's dealing with. We don't know how severe it is, how major it is, how short or long term it could be, and that's a concern, but typically it tends to be something minor, and whether you had sprained an ankle going up the stairs in your house or something, it can be little things like that, but hopefully we'll find out some more concrete details on just a timeline or a better sense of what the injury situation is on Gerald Everett a little bit sooner. But they were able to address Karan Amagaji's injury a little bit more. And I think Ryan Poles did a good job of trying to stay very positive about it and trying to reaffirm that their faith and confidence in Karan Amagaji as a means of maybe distracting from the idea that, hey, this was not what the plan was supposed to be. This was not the timeline they were thinking. This is clearly not. They were, based on what we heard from them earlier in the offseason, they said, training camp, Amagaji will be good to go. Amagaji not being good to go by training camp is a problem. The Bears are spinning it positively, and I understand why, but this is not ideal. This is not going exactly the way they said it would or had hoped it would. So I actually want to go back and do this. So back in May, after the draft, the Bears go to rookie minicamp. Here's what Matt Eberflus said on May 10th at the start of rookie minicamp when he announced that Karan Amagaji would be missing the offseason program. This is not from this is not the training camp press conference. This is rookie minicamp press conference right after the draft.
Karan is not practicing today, so he's won't be available to practice pretty much all through the offseason. We knew about this injury, this quad injury that he had, at his college, and we want to get that process in terms of the whole rehab and everything so he's healthy for training camp. So that's where he's going to be.
At the time, pretty easy to buy in and say, okay, yeah, they knew about this. They're not super worried about it. They're being extra cautious. And he'll be good for training camp. And so that's what's really important. We talked about with the defensive line and wanting to see them with their pads on. Really, offensive line very similar, right? You're not going to, it's valuable for a rookie especially to be out there, but the real practices start at training camp with the pads on. So, it seemed very much like we're not that worried about it. They'll be ready by training camp. No big deal. We'll take it nice and slow and steady, and everything will be fine. But now we're at training camp and Karan Amagaji's on the non-football injury list. Again, third round pick this season, not recovered in the timeline that 2 months ago in a couple days, the Bears seemed pretty confident and secure in. So here's how Ryan Poles addressed it at the press conference. Again, very positively, not trying to downplay any sense of this being a big deal, but I think the Eberflus quote before this illustrates to me that, hey, this is actually still kind of a big deal. Like the fact that he's not ready yet seems like a problem here because the plan all along was for him to be ready by now. But Ryan Poles tries to calm things down here and say, hey, don't worry about it. We're still very happy with how things go.
In terms of designations to start here, Karan is going to start on NFI. He has done an outstanding job this offseason working and rehabbing. We love his work ethic. That's one of the reasons why he's here. He's progressing. Everything is positive, but I don't have a specific timetable right now.
It's great that Amagaji is a hard worker. I mean, absolutely. But like that, hard working is not the concern here or the question here. Like pretty much all these guys are hard workers. I don't know if there's a player on the Bears who doesn't work hard. And hardworking isn't necessarily like, yes, rehab is hard work, and you can work harder on it than others, with physical therapy and stuff. But like, I don't know that alleviates my concern. It's like, oh, okay, like he's injured, but he's a hard worker, so he'll be fine. Well, like, no, like this player that was drafted with a known injury that was supposed to be better by now is not better. And I think we've all been a little scarred in this city and around this team with draft picks that start out with injuries. There were some injury concerns about Tevin Jenkins when they first drafted him. And what have we seen for 3 seasons? He's been really good, but he's been injured all 3 seasons. I mean, you go back to Kevin White, injury concerns right out of the gate, and then it continues to be a problem. Chris Williams, Gabe Karimi, if you go back years and years in the draft, like starting off injured is not always the end of the world, but like having again, we can't say it's a setback. We don't know that for sure, but like starting off injured and then having that injury problem linger longer than you thought it would is the red flag that we've seen too much in this city. And maybe Amagaji just needed a few extra days, and by Monday he'll be off the non-football injury list and practicing. I mean, I'm not trying to put him in. I'm not trying to make a direct comparison and say, oh yes, this means he's going to have injury problems his whole career. I just want to like contextualize that like we have some injury PTSD here when it comes to Chicago Bears draft picks, starting off literally on the wrong foot with some of these injuries. And so it's just kind of like, I was like, when the Amagaji injury first came out, it was like, okay, let's not panic yet. He'll be fine by training camp. We can see this through. Now we're at training camp and he's not ready yet. I'm not saying let's panic, but I'm saying, okay, we got to dial up the concern a little bit more here. And that we can dial it back down as soon as he's ready to go. But like, just want to keep tabs on that and not let Ryan Poles tell us, oh, he's a hard worker, so don't worry about it. These are not the droids you're looking for. Nothing to see here. Move along. Like, okay, maybe there's nothing to see here. But Ryan Poles said, hey, we don't have a timeline on it. It wasn't like he could have come out and said he's starting on the non-football injury list. He's really close. We just need to give him a few more days. He goes, well, he's starting on the non-football injury list, and we don't have a timetable for his return just yet. Don't have an update for you there. That seems like a red flag. Not a full-on panic, but a red flag when it comes to the Amagaji injury situation. And you can be sure when we get updates on that, we'll be keeping close tabs on it for a premium draft pick on this Bears team at an important position on the offensive line. Plenty more training camp updates coming our way. I mean, we got audio from Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, I think DJ Moore, Tremaine Edmonds. There's a bunch of players that all talked to kick off training camp. So we're going to bring you the most important updates from that. And anytime we get big training camp practice updates, we'll have them for you here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming back on Monday as we keep our training camp updates rolling. If you're looking for a second listen today, I co-hosted the Locked On NFL podcast, where we talked about the Devonta Adams situation, the Brandon Ayuk situation, and some of the best, most valuable non-QB rookies around the NFL as the rookies were reporting to training camp. So go check out Locked On NFL wherever you find your podcasts or on the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Then come on back Monday for another episode of Locked On Bears. We're here for you 5 days a week to make sure that every single day you get another opportunity to bear down.